First off, my name is Lars Schmidt. I am the founder of Amplify Talent, which is an employer branding and recruiting consultancy based outside of Washington, D.C. I am a lifelong recruiting guy. I've been in corporate recruiting leadership roles most of my career at places like National Public Radio and Ticketmaster and a few startups in Los Angeles and New York. So today we're going to be talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is talent brand. Recruiting is really at a very fascinating time right now. This is actually my third Talent Connect, and one of the things that I did before coming here is I looked at the speaker lineup. And I think my first one was 2012, and offhand there was maybe one or two people who had job titles that were specifically based around talent brand. There were over a dozen here, and I bet many more who are actually in attendance and not speaking. So it speaks to you how talent brand and the idea of employer brand has really blossomed and grown and has become a vital component to a talent strategy. So we're going to have some fun over the next hour. I know you guys had a lot of great sessions to attend in this time slot, so we appreciate you spending time with us. We've got a pretty diverse set of perspectives and experiences in this panel. And so in a moment, I'm going to turn it over to them to go through and introduce themselves. But what I want to just remind everybody, again, this is intended to be really interactive. We're going to aim for about the second half of this to be Q&A, if not, the last at least 30%. So if you have questions, ask them. It's a big family here. We're all friends. We're all branding geeks, so there are no bad questions. The idea of this, particularly with an emphasis on small to medium-sized business, is a lot of us have come from environments that are pretty lean. You're a recruiting leader, you're a recruiter, and you've got a lot of different sets of responsibilities, of which talent branding is typically one. So how do you make that work? What are some tips and tricks to allow you to more effectively manage your time in building your own employer brand? And we're going to go over all those things today. So with that, I'd love to open it up to the panelists for introductions. And when you introduce yourself, please also share how you define employer brand.
All right. My name is Kristen Lamper. I work for a firm called Ziegler. It's a boutique investment bank in Chicago, 270 people and a department of 3 in HR. And I kind of help lead the efforts in employee engagement, employee relations, and also recruiting. So I lead that effort too. And for me, when I think about employment branding, I think about it in the same kind of context that you think about your own personal brand. It's a compilation of how you sell yourself, whether or not you're looking at your values, the culture you reflect, your inspiration, as well as your abilities and traits. When you compile that into an organization, it really is the difference that you make in attracting top talent.
Thanks. My name is Anita McFadden, and I work for a company called Covidien, which is a global medical device company. And I do the recruitment brand for our global operations. And so for me, when I think about employment brand, it's that consistent story that we tell as a company that most people don't know about unless you buy medical products at a hospital or a medical organization. People don't know what Covidien does. And so part of what we do is, what is that company and what do they make, which many of you may have that same challenge. And the other half of it is, it's like, well, what would it be like? Would I fit in there? Is there a community there that's going to help make me successful? What is the real life like? And try to be authentic about that. And I think that's what employment brand is. And as my background is more in marketing, I have never been really a recruiter, so I take a different perspective sometimes than the teams I work with to say, well, what is it that people are telling you? Because you're talking to your customers every day. And that's a big part of the story that we need to tell on a regular basis.
Hi, I'm Ron Storn. I'm VP of People at Lyft. So Lyft is the ride-sharing company that is your friend in the car. For those of you who have not seen Lyft before, in San Francisco you might have seen the cars driving around with pink mustaches. That's Lyft. So what we're trying to do is disrupt the way people transit within cities as we try to make it more affordable, safer, and much more connected. The way I look at employment branding is very similar to our internal culture. What we try to do is have core values that really emanate within our internal employees, but also within the experience on the platform as well as external candidates. So if we're all focused on those core principles, that we will attract the right talent that can opt into our environment and our goals.
Hi, my name is JT O'Donnell, and I'm the CEO of Careerism Media. And I'm actually on the other side. We specialize in employment branding. For me, the definition is storytelling. I think of branding, if you think about a physical brand, as an imprint. And our job is to imprint on the brains of our talent so that they can remember us and think about us when the time comes to find a job, especially all those passive job seekers. So for me, it's about understanding the power of branding and how important it is so that you can get those best candidates not just now, but in the future when they're actually ready to look for work.
Great. And just a quick, let's engage the room a little bit here. One quick question, just a bit of housekeeping. These are your panelists and the Twitter handles. So how many of you are tweeting what you're learning? How many are live tweeting? Excellent. Okay, so here's how you can reference people. You already know the hashtag for the event is InTalent. From an audience standpoint, how many of you are directly in a recruiting role right now? Recruiting is your primary responsibility. Okay, how many of you are in an exclusive branding role? One hand. All right, so props to you back there. Part of what, I think that's what makes employment brand and small to medium-sized businesses so, interesting and at times challenging, because we wear a lot of hats as recruiting leaders. And oftentimes at the origin, when we're trying to build employer brand within our organizations, some organizations may be a little slower to allow you to get that done. And so one of the questions I'd like to actually put to all the panelists is, what was your kind of origin story like for advocating for building a conscious employer brand within your organization, and how did you maybe overcome some of the hurdles or obstacles you may have faced in doing that?
Well, I'll start with that. When I first came to Covidian 4 years ago, we had a LinkedIn company page, and I didn't really ask anybody. I just kind of started posting jobs and stuff about the company and the culture there, and I built a good relationship with the vice president of corporate communications, and we had kind of a handshake agreement that as I started to talk about things about the culture, what it was like to work there, what kind of products we make, how we work with patients and make differences in people's lives, and the day-to-day culture, the ice cream truck that came on, and things like that. The deal was pretty much don't talk about product because you can't answer the questions. And, don't talk about technologies or sort of obviously any company secrets. And so we had a handshake agreement, and we started with LinkedIn, which I think is a really safe place to start in terms of talking directly to the candidates and to the people who are interested in your company, because people are their professional selves on LinkedIn. They're dressed for work. They're not, sharing cat videos for the most part. So it's a good place to start. And so we kind of grew quietly in the background from there, and when we wanted to use Twitter, then it became much more of a corporate process. And because we're in a regulated healthcare industry, we needed to get legal involved, we needed to talk to the regulatory affairs organization, we needed to make some processes and deals clear to those organizations that we would be a responsible voice for the company. And in my company, the social media policy was you cannot use social media. So it was pretty clear. So for a company of the size that we are, I was like the first person who got to use social media who was not a corporate communications person. And I think it was because of the slow build of using LinkedIn that it was possible then to move on to something like Twitter, where you could be talking to the cat. So I think, it's kind of a different environment, and the company was very, very nervous about it. And we've been fine. And we've been doing it for a year, and it's been a great learning experience. And a few months ago, the company also started to use Twitter for their news feed and things like that, so I feel like that was a victory.
Thank you. I, too, work in a pretty heavily regulated industry, financial services, and our firm is kind of the David to the behemoth Goliath is out there. And so we were very fortunate in our organization to adopt social media relatively earlier and embrace, what was a revolutionizing technology. For myself, employment branding was vital because no one knows what a Ziglar is. And I have to find a way to tell people what a Ziglar is. And I'm only one person and one voice, and when I have to recruit 50 people a year, my time gets zapped up really quickly. So I had to find other ways to tell the story. And that's where I pulled in LinkedIn. And I started partnering with my RM here and really just building out what is now, I think, a much more robust program. I did meet a lot of opposition initially. I spent a lot of time doing research. I looked at all my competitors. I looked at everybody out in the field. What are they doing? They have way more resources. They have a lot more money to put towards this, and I need to be able to give an ROI. So I spent a lot of time looking at my current users. Who's currently using it? Do we have any good success stories within our environment? Are these individuals making money off of the relationships that they're building, either through their clients or with or building referrals? We have about 60% of our new employees hired over the last year and a half have been either sourced through LinkedIn or have been employee referrals. And that has been mainly because I've been putting the onus back on our employees to be the brand ambassador, to be that representation and to really champion the voice, virtually as well as in their own networks.
So when I joined Lyft, we were still a relatively small company. We were 85 employees, and our co-founder was very passionate about brand, but in his mind, brand was very focused on the ride, so the drivers and the passengers. And what separates us from our competitors and what is our exact experience? So some common themes came out of that. It's very uplifting, so the drivers and passengers really create an atmosphere that really encourages others to feel good about going from point A to point B. Also, the drivers are very creative. I mean, we have one driver that has a disco that he puts in his cars. So we try to emulate that internally as well. So again, most of this was very geared towards the rides. It was also being yourself, is being authentic, who you are, and also having impact. So what I tried to talk with the co-founder about is that I think we can use that, but we need to make sure that we can embellish that and have that consistent across all different stakeholders, to our internal employees, to our external candidates, and then we developed our own core set of values that could really amplify all of the different stakeholders. So what I did is I partnered with our creative team and our brand team to really come out with something that was really consistent and applicable to all areas. And so the four areas were be yourself, create fearlessly, make it happen, and uplift others. So things can really resonate with potential candidates who can opt into what we're trying to build at Lyft. And also at the same time, we were using other social media platforms. We had Facebook lounges, we had LinkedIn, and we had Glassdoor. And what we tried to do is gear that more towards our candidates on the external market, that what you see on the platform, you could also see internally here. And to date, it's been a good amount of success. We're still at the infinite stages, but in the last 16 months, we have grown from 85 employees to over 370. So it's been a pretty crazy ride.
And what time frame is that again, that growth?
16 months.
Wow.
Yeah. And also from a growth standpoint, from a company, we were in 6 cities, and now we're in 67 cities in the U.S., so pretty tremendous growth.
I'll just hit on it from the other side. The aha moments for us came when companies were coming in saying, the candidates that are applying know nothing about us. They're not a fit, they're terrible, they're not a match, I can't get excited about them. And so we would sit with the client and say, well, where can they learn what they need to learn in order to really wow you with that cover letter, blow you away with that resume and that application? And we would go and search for them online, and there are studies out there that show us now 60% of buying decisions are made on the first pass on the internet. How many of you would buy something that costs thousands of dollars without first researching it? Not a single one of us. Well, job seekers are no different. They're out there looking for you, but they can't find your information. So for your C-suite, what you can go back and say is brand or be branded. And if they're not branding, just tell them that they're also saying one of three things. Either one, there's nothing interesting about our company. Nothing. Two, we've got something to hide. Or three, we're just so not technologically savvy that we can't figure this stuff out. I don't think there's a C-suite member out there that wants any of those things as their brand, and that's how you can start to hit them a little bit between the eyeballs with this.
Yeah, so there's a little insight when you're pitching your C-suite and trying to get some adoption and buy-in. One of the things that I've always found to be really helpful is do a competitive analysis. Sometimes fear of falling behind your competitors is the push that your C-suite might need in order to help you and kind of support you adopting some of these branding efforts. Because ultimately, your employment brand exists. Whether you do nothing or you do a lot, it exists. So you can either consciously try to cultivate and steer what that is and own the story yourself. Not own the story, but I should say shape the narrative, or sit back and be whatever people are saying about you, basically have that be the perception with you having no control. And JT, I actually want to go back to you on that piece. You've worked with a lot of, I think your perspective in understanding job seekers and kind of what they like or maybe don't is really valuable. So when you think about an employer brand, what are some elements of a brand that can really attract or repel talent?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think most of the time when I'm working with recruiters, they will tell me that I can't find the people with the right attitude or bringing that right energy to the company. And the truth is, a lot of that can be manipulated and controlled by your employer brand. Because whatever you're putting out there is what they're perceiving and what they're taking in. And so those job seekers are telling us every single day, I just want to be excited about the company. I want to be able to go out and tell the world where I work. Like it or not, we live in a culture where professional identity makes up a huge part of who we are, right? How many of us go out and the first time we meet a stranger, what do we ask them? What do you do? And as soon as they give us an answer, we start thinking about all the people that we know that do that job and start formulating an opinion. Everybody that works for your company may not want to say what job they do, but boy, they'd love to say who they work for. When you give them that story, you're giving them that ability to get excited about you, to bring their A game. And I will tell you, companies, and I think you'll back us up in a minute here, that employ employer branding techniques get a higher level of candidate and a higher level of effort on that candidate. And we all know that in the first 90 days, we know how the performance of that candidate will be. But we see strong employer brands drive better productivity and performance long term. So good reasons to do it on that front.
Yeah. And I'm curious, how many of you in the audience have a proactive, conscious employer brand effort at your organization? Okay. How many of you have kicked that off within the last year? Okay, so still a good amount of hands. So I think the thing to keep in mind with employer branding, and obviously we've got a group here that has different perspectives based on where they sit, is that employer branding is still a developing field, right? There really isn't a playbook. None of us are operating with an exact playbook saying if you do exactly this, the results will be exactly that. And so much of what we do, I think, has to be localized to our own organizations, because we can hear stories about companies like Google or Facebook or Amazon and how they attract talent. And that may work for them, but they're working and they're operating in a different environment than people who have a very small kind of local organization and business may be. They have to think differently about how they go about attracting talent. And one of the things that I think has been illuminated a little bit is the idea of storytelling, and how really at the core of employer branding, it ties back to your employees. It ties back to that employee experience. If I'm recruiting product managers and I've targeted somebody that I want to reach out to who's a product manager, they don't really want to hear from me. They want to hear from product managers at my company. They want to know what a day in the life of a product manager at whatever your company is. So I'm curious from all of you in your corporate roles, what role does storytelling and kind of illuminating that employee experience play? Particularly on the end where you have two regulated industries, so that's probably a little more difficult of an environment.
Yeah, well, in our environment, storytelling is vital. And it happens in a lot of different, mediums. But for us, what I have found is, any media-rich components, the videos, anything that people can physically touch to help complement what they've seen in the environment only adds to the richness of their experience. What I find in our organization is we're invested in community. What we do is social enterprise. We're a feel-good investment bank, which is not an oxymoron. It does exist. And that's a good story. And so whenever I'm recruiting, whenever we're complementing the message, when I'm talking to my hiring managers, we're looking for people who are focused on their community. We do a lot in our employee brand around community development and promoting our corporate social responsibility programs, because that aligns people towards a mission, something that is a calling. And that seems to get me higher quality candidates, and I don't have to spend so much time kind of mining the field. I can really allow people to self-select out of whether or not this fits them.
Yeah, so stories, I think, are kind of built into our DNA, that, when there isn't information, we make up a story. If we have a few pieces, we'll make up a story. And so, if we don't tell the story will be told for us. And so for us, we're in the medical device field, and who in this room has not visited a doctor or had someone in their family who needed some emergency care? So we have a really strong story around compassion, around making a difference in patients' lives. But I think it's also really important, since one of the groups that we hire a lot is engineers, is that we need to tell engineers this is not a beer in the fridge engineering organization. It's not foosball. We're a little bit more serious than that. And so for us, the story needs to be about what it's really like. And people are committed to health. They're committed to health care. A lot of our employees have outside activities in either the community or in organizations. The people who go to Doctors Without Borders. There's really some amazing stories in the company of people who came to work here because they wanted to make a difference, or someone in their family had a medical experience and they said, I can do accounting anywhere, but I think I want to do it somewhere where I feel like I'm making a difference. And I think that's the role that story plays for every company, whether it's truck drivers and, garbage trucks, or, whatever you're doing. I mean, there's a reason why people are doing it, and the way that they find value in it. And talking to them and knowing about those stories it will help you tell the story when you're talking to candidates.
I agree 100%. With storytelling, we have a message that we're trying to get across to a bunch of different stakeholders. In order for us to grow, we want to have diversity in thought, diversity in backgrounds. So that message, even though we have that central theme, we're always adapting it to the appropriate channel. So for instance, for Lyft, a lot of the early individuals in their career are easily wooed by Lyft because they use the product. It's a very compelling brand, so it's an easier story to tell. But we also, startup environments, bigger company environments, we want individuals who have both of those experiences. Parents, older individuals, it's a harder story to tell because they don't use the product day in and day out. So what we try to do is talk about how it could impact their parents who are elderly and who can't get around, or their kids who have sports that, if they have this practice, you have multiple kids, I'm in the same boat. How do you get people from practice to the next event? So it's how you tell that story to the different audiences so that it resonates. And again, we're looking for people who are very passionate about disruption. And I think by creating the right story to each of the different audiences, it's helped us, grow that employer brand and grow our talent from a diversity standpoint. And it's going to make us a better company down the road.
I'll just add on that really quickly. It's very exciting to hear that, because this morning we heard about purple squirrels, and we've all dealt with that, right? We all had a great laugh. But one of the ways to start to reduce the amount of requests for purple squirrels is to get the powers to be in a room and make them define these kinds of stories that you want to tell. By getting them on the same page about what's important, you start to clarify their vision about recruiting. So that can be a big plus for you. The other thing I'll tell you is that a lot of times companies will have a bit of an identity crisis when they start thinking about employment branding. Oh, maybe we're not cool enough, or we're not like our competitors. But this is the exact time you embrace your brand, because you are a tribe. You already have a bunch of people working for you, and they're proud to work there. Employer branding isn't just about recruiting, it's about retention.
Yeah.
You need to be able to give those people stories to tell so they can continue to go out there and say, I work here, I've been working here, and I'm really proud to keep on working here. And so you want to be thinking about those stories. And I'll really quickly tell you, if you want the basic playbook, there's 5 stories every company should tell. First of all, your executive assets. Everybody wants to understand why the business came into being. There's a passionate person or set of persons behind that. That story is key. Second one is employee spotlight. Show us that everyday employee so that lots of people can say, hey, I'm like that person. Third one is core values, stake in the ground. What do we believe in? Why do we exist? I think of the Simon Sinek TED Talk, one of the ultimate TED Talks of all time, right? That piece of it. Fourth one is your company fun factor. Yes, they want to know that it's not all work. And then finally, it's the wow factor. It's that thing that they can brag about your company. Those are 5 really easy stories, I think, to tell that we heard through here, and they'll at least get your brand off the ground.
Yeah. Let's shift a little bit and talk a bit more now about measurement. So we talked a little bit about kind of how to get your employer brand started, how to get executive buy-in and adoption of your programs, and kind of where you start, what are some of the channels. But so let's say you've done that. Maybe you're 6 to 9 months down the road, and because ultimately, if you're building a branding effort within your organization, you're always going to be fighting to justify it and to build support. Support doesn't end once you get permission. Support's something that's why I think kind of managing up and gathering data and metrics to share with your boss and marketing and communications and the other stakeholders and brand is really important, because you want to show them the results that it's having. So I'm curious to get all of your take. Like, how do you determine if your employer brand efforts are being successful? And when you maybe identify that something's not working, how do you adapt that and maybe pivot if you need to?
So I love metrics, and ever since I started posting content on LinkedIn and then on Twitter, I've been keeping track of how many people view it and how many people click on it, and that's the way that you learn, because we can all make assumptions about what people want to hear about, and we can all make posts and hope that someone reads it, but it's when you look at the numbers that you know whether you're being effective or not. So my rule of thumb is a post that I put on our company page on LinkedIn should get a 0.5% or higher response rate. So I like to see what does better than that. And I think you probably all know that the people who are looking at your company page or who are following your company on LinkedIn, they're looking for you to help them come work for you. 70% of them want to come and work for you at some point. So you're helping them understand why they should. So what's been really effective for us on the metric side, and because I look at it all the time, I can look at what's most effective. And we ask people to share our posts. We always make sure that we post at a certain time every week, because time is important. And generally my view is Monday morning is the best time to post content on LinkedIn. I probably shouldn't be telling you that, because then you'll all be doing it too. But you come off the weekend and you think, oh, I have to go to work. I need to do something else. That's a great time. One of my highest sort of engaging posts was a Wednesday afternoon post, and it said, having a bad day? Need a new plan? Check out our career site. And so we used our LinkedIn post to drive traffic to our jobs in that way. And it was like 2% or more. I can't remember the exact number, but it was like, wow. So sometimes you just have to try something and see what happens. And then some of my posts are like 0.2, 0.3. It's like, I guess I don't want to talk about that anymore. And maybe I try it again at a different time of the week. But there's time and content. And so I think those are the things to keep in mind. And those analytics are visible to you on your company page. And I would make sure that you look at them every week or every other week, and that you're keeping track of what's working, what's not. It'll tell you, within a couple of days, your answer is there. Sometimes within the first day, you know whether you have a good message out there. And that helps inform what you talk about everywhere else. So that would be my advice. Metrics will be your friend, and you'll get surprises.
To add on that, we also use a lot of the same types of metrics. I do, obviously extract information from my relationship manager and try to find out where we're at, and I know my baseline. So one big, key point is you need to know where you started. So keep track of, how many followers you had, how many clicks, what those percentages are now, because it's going to be a great success story when you look a year later and you've got, like us, a 760% increase in job views, which is fantastic. But there's a couple other ways I measure. One is I work with our CEO and I fill him in a lot on our dependency on agency costs on the recruitment side. I want to prove that I'm reducing costs. I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes, senior management, they want to see the bottom line numbers. I also look at who's adopting. Once they're in my environment, I've had that successful hire. Are they on LinkedIn? Are they posting? Are they reposting what we posted as a firm? Have they followed our own firm? Those are all signs, A, for me, when it comes to employee engagement and for retention's sake, but it also makes sure that our people are part of the brand. And then, the other thing that I do is I engage our high performers, and I want to make sure our high performers are really owning the brand as much as possible, not only for the referral process and to get, really other great high performers in our environment. And I also want to make sure that they're engaged and that they're utilizing and sharing their story in whatever way it may be. And if that's at a community event, or we do a lot of fun things like associate sponsorship programs, and we share if someone is making crocheting blankets for a local hospital, we'll post that. We want to share the community message. That's part of our commitment to the brand.
Piggybacking on that, definitely understanding where you're starting from is a good benchmark to see where you can go. On a couple of different platforms, specifically LinkedIn and Glassdoor, our branding as well as our views, our just awareness was very low when I first started, and if you look now a year later, it's actually been insane growth on both platforms. I think on Glassdoor we're over 10,000%. I forget exactly what the amount is, but it's crazy. So that's one way of looking at success. But another way is you have this increased awareness, you have this increased eyeballs on your sites, but are they opting in to the actual hiring process and to the jobs that you have? So I'll give you one story. Our co-founder, his cousin, was a creative director or creative producer at a well-known company. And obviously he knew about Lyft because they're family members and so forth. But because of our LinkedIn messaging and our LinkedIn exposure, he really got excited about Lyft. And because of that, he opted in and is now working at Lyft. So just that exposure can take it to the next level, even if you already have connections within those companies. And then I think the other piece is, from an employer standpoint, if you hire these individuals from these exposures and these sites, I think the ROI on that is much more higher than using an outside search firm or using other methods. And I think that's where you can have a buy-in from executive leadership in terms of costs and expenses and so forth.
I would just add in and tell them that they're digital assets too. So these articles and posts and things that you're writing get reused. And the more they get used and viewed, the higher their SEO ranking is, for example, if you're posting on blogs and whatnot. So there's a lot of traction that I think that comes with that. And then the other soft metric that I just might mention is when you start seeing more applications that are actually personalized. The stories are, I read your article on this, I saw this, I was inspired to reach out. It can be as simple as that you know that things are starting to work for you.
Let's talk briefly about failure. Failure is fun. As we talk about employer branding, the fact that there isn't a playbook, we're all kind of learning as we go. That means that we're taking risks. And sometimes those risks pay off, and sometimes they fall flat. And so I'll actually go first, just to say I'm willing to share my own failure before I ask all of you. Video job descriptions. I was really excited about creating a video job description when I was working at NPR. And our programming team was getting ready to expand. We're going to be launching 2 brand new shows, which is the first time we've done that in 5 years. So I was jazzed. I talked to the head of programming. I said, we're going to do a video, and I'm going to interview you, and we're going to talk about these awesome shows and the roles and what we're looking for, and it's going to be great. And so he agreed because, he's game. And so I had our production group set it up. We go in there. I'd never shot video before. So what ended up happening is we both went into a room that we designed as a studio. Both of us happened to be wearing black shirts. The backdrop happened to be black. So needless to say, it was also way too long. It was a 4-minute video of two floating heads talking to each other about jobs, and it was awful. So I learned a lot about how not to do a video job description in that example. So I won't call anybody out specifically, but would any of you like to share examples of your failure that we can all laugh at but learn from and embrace you?
One failure that I had made, and I think it turned into a success, and I learned something through it, and luckily I learned early into the process, was, we wanted to launch our LinkedIn employee brand. We really wanted employee engagement, and we had done a happy hour. So we set up little stations, and we said, all right, we'll bribe you with alcohol, and we'll tell you about how to engage in social media. We created all these great training materials and all this fun stuff. And we had great participation at the event. But about maybe 2 hours into it, our head of investment banking kind of moseys down, and he's like, so what is this LinkedIn thing? And I'm like, oh, you're not on? And he's like, no. And I'm like, okay, well, out of the kindness of my heart, I sat down and I proceeded to spend about 2 hours putting together his LinkedIn profile and going through his resume and typing everything in and helping him find his connections and all that fun stuff. And that investment paid off tremendously, because once he started seeing friends and colleagues and old flames or whomever on LinkedIn, he started to push the message down, so from top to bottom. So one thing I didn't do was I didn't engage leadership at the very beginning of the process and say, all right, are you guys all on this thing? Do you want to be part of this, and can I help you through that process? I learned through our happy hour, maybe about a month and a half into the launch. I really wish I would have done that earlier. But the great story is we've got 35 investment bankers, and every single one of them have a profile, and he hunted down everyone to make sure they did. So it can be a success, but do that early.
So I guess if I think about some of the mistakes that we've made is in the video world as well, in that we set out to represent our employees on a global basis on our career site, and I think the mistake that we made was that we made them so global that they didn't feel local. And so if you click on our manufacturing video, it's our people in the Dominican Republic, and they're speaking Spanish, which they would, and it's subtitled, but how does that feel local to Indiana? It doesn't. And so I think our mistake was really not thinking about how local it all is, and making sure that we no matter how many places in the world you work or how many places you recruit, in the end it's a local decision, and trying to make the content more local, I think that was our biggest mistake.
My mistake's a little bit different. It's not a one point in time mistake. It's more a theme. So getting the employer message out there, you want people who are passionate for your product. So, and that's great, but oftentimes people who are passionate about your product might not fit the entire culture of the company. So early on when I first joined, we always wanted to hire people who use our product or power users. But ultimately, what we decided after we had some misses in using that type of philosophy is you want to have people who are passionate about disruption. They don't have to be a huge avid user up front. Maybe they don't have access to it, but you want to have that mindset that they like to disrupt and that they can come around to using your product down the road. And since we made that subtle shift, it's really worked out. But again, when you have that employer brand, you want to get people really excited about your company. Excitement is one piece, but it's not the only piece.
I guess working with clients, something that comes to mind is experiments never fail, because I look at these three and hear that they made these mistakes, but they actually taught them something and their brands got better for it. So I think the big mistake companies make is they're just so afraid to put their toe in the water and even try. You're not going to nail it. It's just you're not going to get every single piece of employment branding right, but it's going to teach you something every time, which I think is cool. For me, I think the worst thing I've seen clients is be inauthentic and be a little too rah-rah. So usually when people submit their first piece to me, there's a lot of awesome in it. I hear awesome this, we're awesome that, we're this great, you know, and we have to tell them to tone it down and be real and not be afraid to talk about the warts too. So when you start to be more authentic, I think it's more believable, I guess.
So last question for the panel, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. I'd like to end with hacks, tech, cool tools. Like, what do you use in your workflow that helps you be more efficient and optimize your time?
So my favorite is Hootsuite.
Okay.
And this is a free software that you can use to schedule all your posts on your social media. And so it frees you up from the, oh, I didn't do that today kind of thing. And it allows you to schedule out months in advance, weeks in advance, days in advance, whatever. And it also allows you to monitor other things, content that you want to reshare, which is a big part of attracting people, is that you want to give them advice about how to be a good candidate or how to be a good job seeker, or if you're an introvert, how do you network? I mean, these are all things people want to know who are in the job seeking mode or in the thinking about it mode. And so you can mix your employee stories and your brand information and the news about your company with these helpful things that you don't have to write it all. You can just share it from somewhere that you find, and you can keep it all in Hootsuite. And so that's my everyday activity. So that's where and you can bulk upload some things to it, so you can plan out a campaign around it coming to LinkedIn or whatever is going on in your community. So that would be my secret sauce.
Ours is working in such a heavily compliant world. Every post has to be approved by compliance and marketing. Everything has to have a disclaimer. That can be a very intimidating concept for an end user, particularly our own associates. Most will just say, forget it, I won't do it. So what we've done within the Hearsay platform is really build out a lot of templates, build out a lot of resources. So there is a plug and play component, and it's also linked into all the major, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, so they can have some replication in all mediums. So our associates really embrace it, but there's a little learning curve in the training side, but it's definitely worth it.
What we use is the Muse. It's more of an insight into what it's like to work at Lyft. Also, some compelling stories about individuals who work there, what their backgrounds were. And it's not something you have to update every day. It's more of a story that you can tell and refresh on a monthly or quarterly basis. And we recently utilized that, and some of the responses have been pretty exemplary, and hopefully we continue to use that and other resources down the road.
I would just say it's not so much a hack as it is we underestimate the power of our staff. You can crowdsource them for great ideas about your company, things that you can tell from a storytelling standpoint. And also, I think that's a LinkedIn study that says 70% of employees are more likely to tweet, share, post articles about your company because, again, of that brand identity and feeling part of your tribe. So just more of an active participation in letting them know about what's new and different from a storytelling standpoint.
And I'll throw in there as well as Buffer. Buffer is a really cool content marketing tool that allows you to schedule posts across multiple channels. So if you're in a branding role where you're pushing out content to corporate, your corporate LinkedIn page, your own LinkedIn page, Twitter, Facebook pages, whatever it might be, you can push to all those channels through Buffer, and you can actually integrate RSS feeds directly into it. So if you have typical places where you go to get your news that you share, Buffer is a great place to do that all in one spot. So with that, let's open up to Q&A. And remember, we've got microphones here and here, so please come up to the mic and share your questions.
Good afternoon. So a big part of every company's branding strategy is the use of their employees to get out a consistent message. And one of the problems I know I had at my company, and it's prevalent here, is you can't tell what companies do by the names of the companies anymore. So can you just tell me what you do to make sure the message going from your employees is consistent and getting out the description of your company? Because again, where I worked, when I first got there, there were 40 people. If you asked 40 people what we did, you got 40 different answers. And that was a big issue. I'm just wondering how you guys deal with that.
Yeah, that can be challenging. I think my experience is that if you give people tools that help them do what you want them to do, they will use them. And so one thing that we have provided, at least to our recruiters, is, here is the basic talking points, here is the basic who we are, and that encourage them to use that in their profiles or in the way that you communicate, whatever ways those are. If you give them something that's meaningful to them, they will use it. And I think sometimes the hard part is to find that most meaningful thing.
I'll just jump in and say that when we sit in a room together, we'll say, if you had to explain what the company does to a 5th grader, what would you tell them? And we work on it and work on it until we have an answer. And a lot of times you're using a really basic analogy or something simple, but that aha moment means you can tell that to absolutely anyone and they'll understand it, especially if they're not in your field. So focus on that 5th grader. And then the other thing is we answer 3 questions. We love to solve blank problem. We do it with blank methodology. And now we want to do blank in the world. And if you can answer those 3 things, and again, from that 5th grader mentality, it's usually pretty universal. It can help them get the word out.
Great. Over here.
This is for JT. So as we embark on creating a brand for the company, curious as to what degree the branding itself influences the actual culture itself. So reality of the culture versus the other way around, and how we might control that or consider that as we embark on branding.
It's an interesting question. So the question is the brand defined and then you push the brand out, or can the brand actually affect the culture? And the answer is yes. You can actually shift your culture with branding. But you need to be very committed to that idea. So when you first start thinking about your brand, you have to ask yourself, what are the core messages? If somebody was only given 5 words to describe this company, what would they be? And again, you get on the same page with that. And then culturally, you look at what that would look like. And again, those stories, if you go back to those 5 stories, executive assets, employee spotlight, values, fun factor, wow factor, you can start to drop those core things in and see a pattern. And I would definitely encourage you to do that. Branding doesn't have to be expensive, but there should be some think behind it. You want to ask yourself, what do we want to look like in 2 years? In 5 years, and can we define that culture? And again, that being said, if you go down the path and you realize that you need to switch directions, branding is one of the best ways to do that. But you do need your staff behind it, because there's nothing worse, and I think this is the point you're trying to make, than to say, we want to be this kind of company, but we're not that kind of company. And then when somebody gets in there, they say that brand was misrepresented. So you do need to make sure that you've defined that brand before you start to push too much of that out. Does that make sense? Yeah? A little bit of both, I guess. Not the clearest of answers.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback briefly on that. If your employer brand is disconnected with the realities of your employees, you've got a problem. Because ultimately, you're going to be attracting people to your organization based on something that's polished and isn't quite what they're going to experience. And chances are, within 6 months, they're going to leave. So I think as you're crafting your employer brand story, it's really important to make sure that it does align well with the underlying structure of the organization and the experience of your employees.
Yeah, I'll just tag on and say I had a client recently I said, what do you need in talent? And he said, I need fighter pilots. I need Top Gun. I need people that can do a million things in the moment under pressure. He said, but I can't say that. I won't get good talent. And I said, well, but that's what you need. That's what you feel you need. That's what you get behind. That's what you deliver. So why would you try to deviate from that? And when he accepted that and we started to build the brand around the fighter pilot mentality, guess what? He started to get the kinds of people that he was looking for. But that was a scary thing. So you have to ask yourself those tough questions. Your company has to look in the mirror.
I'm just going to add on to that really quickly. One thing that so there's 2 ways to go about understanding your culture. One is asking the question about culture, which all of you are trained very easily to answer when you're going through the recruitment process. You know your bullet points. You can sell the firm really quickly. The other one is, if you were cozied up to a bar and you heard 2 employees talking about their day and you overheard it, what would that story be? And I think that's where you have to figure out the gap analysis between what is and what will be, and manage it. And even as I think you build the employee brand, there's a pragmatism around, you don't have to necessarily, glaze over it. You need to embrace, I think, like you said earlier, the warts, find those components, and also show that you're committed to changing them.
So I've got a question about employee stories. We're thinking about doing testimonials. I've got this vision of, having a careers page with people talking about how fabulous it is to work at my place because it's amazing, blah, blah, blah. But what I'm trying to convince I'm imagining the look on my CEO's face because people leave. You may be shocked to hear that. So, what do I tell them whenever, okay, I've produced a video, and people go, what's your response to that? What do you do? Because I'm sure that happens.
It absolutely happens. So a couple of things. When we do employee spotlight, it's more about an element that employee is identifying within the company. So for example, let's say you have flex time. Showcase the person that utilizes flex time. Showcase that one element of the work that works for them. If they leave, it's a non-issue. If you do the full-on spotlight of everything about this person, I've seen those too, right? Every little hobby they have, everything that they're like, and then the person comes to the interview and says, I want to meet that guy. Well, he's not here anymore, right? So a great example of you thinking forwardly, but note your flex time, or note that they came because they wanted to work on this particular thing. Then it becomes universal. It's got shelf life.
Yeah, I think, when you're saying it's awesome to work here, it's great, I think that's not really what the story is. The story is, one example that I can think of is, say, we wanted to make sure that our interns understood that there was a lot of career advancement and internal support for development. So we focused on that in the story, as opposed to, nobody believes it's awesome to work here. It's not the story. It doesn't tell them what it's like. Will you be good for me? Will I fit in? Will I find friends? So I think that's the important focus, is to understand those little points that you want to make, and then find the people that will help you make those stories real.
And I think it's unrealistic to expect no turnover, right? So if you spotlight the key employees and then they go on to bigger and better things, they got their launch point in your company, so there's still opportunity to grow not only within your company, but also for your career. So it could also be a positive. You don't have to look at it from a negative standpoint.
Another question?
Thank you.
So I know with some of the smaller companies, you tend to not have an abundance of stories to tell all the time, and sometimes you have to stretch for content. Do you find it more important to maintain a posting schedule, at least with social media, or is it more about the quality and content of the post? So would you skip a week because you don't have a good story to share?
That's a good question. I think on LinkedIn, I try not to skip a week. But I also think that if you don't have anything to say, you probably should not say it. Because also, if you're just sort of spewing information out there that people don't connect to, you see people stop following you, or say they just get a bad impression or bad feel about the company. But one thing that you can do is, going back to metrics, is to take those top 5 things that you posted in the last 6 months and reuse them. Because the stream of people moving past your content is always moving. They're not the same all the time. And so keep a library of things that you know are successful for those moments where it's like, I don't know what to say this week.
I think quality over quantity should always rule the day. I mean, the quality will amplify much larger than if you just put a post every week. So you should always focus on what will be memorable to the audience you're trying to reach.
Yeah, I'll just jump on that and say that you should also curate content. It shouldn't only be your own content. So if you know what you want to be the subject matter experts in, you should be sourcing content from other sites and putting that out there with your own spin on it. Your LinkedIn is like your own TV show for your business. And those people want to hear from you each and every day. So if it's not your own things that you're writing, share something that you think is fabulous. They're going to remember where they got that sourced from. They'll remember that you were the people that brought it to them first.
And to add on to that, get creative about what you're sourcing. I mean, you've got clients, you've got prospects, you've got employees who probably had referrals. There's a lot of different sources that maybe you could add a new perspective, or at least look at the story in a different way. Maybe you're just using the same old sources all the time, and you just need to draw a little bit of a wider circle to pull in some new stories.
Yeah, and I think I want to just underscore JT's point around curation. Curation is a really important aspect of employer branding. You know, no matter how many people you have, A, it's going to be very difficult to continually and regularly pump out company-specific content. The goal of your social channels is to build community, and you do that by providing value. That's not, you know, not everybody at any given time is going to want to know a testimonial from your employees. You know, they're going to want to see some of that, but they're also going to want to see your point of view on the industry news, things that are relevant. You need to think about it more from a standpoint of how can I provide value to this audience that's going to build this audience and have them more engaged with these channels. And ultimately through them, they're going to share your content. It's going to lead to discovery. More people are going to get in your recruiting funnel, and ultimately more people will convert to hires. So I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you. I work for an organization where we're fairly pleased that our employee brand is strong and metrically strong. A few weeks ago, and based around, I work in Australia, so Australian business, Australian product, lots of Australian locations. And a few weeks ago, we were acquired by a global US organization, and we rebrand in a couple of weeks. And so we've kind of on a head spin to change that message that global's good, and that Australian message will filter out. Any life rings you can throw me.
Wow. Well, I'm going to go back to the comment that I made about local. I think that the global company needs to learn about how to mix that global and local, and we're in a similar position in that we're in the process of being acquired as well. So come see me next year, I'll tell you how it went. But I think, you know, the thing that the thing they acquired, they have to be very careful to not destroy it by just glossing it over with the U.S. brand. And maybe it's too late, but I don't know.
Yeah, I might just jump on that and tell you that there's a real opportunity for transparency here. So if you can work with the new global entity and say, this is what we've established, this is a highly engaged community, let's give them the information first. Again, brand or be branded. So get those nuggets, keep them up to date on the transition so they feel a part of the process. It'll go much smoother, and of course all your employees will be following it too, right, to see what's happening. So it's not just recruiting, it's also retention.
All right, so I think we're good on time. One quick housekeeping. They're going to be giving out surveys for all the sessions, so they take that feedback and it really helps them steer the direction for future conferences, so please fill those out. And let's thank our panelists for joining us. All right, and thank all of you for joining us as well. Take care.